Just are you, O Holy One, who is and who was, for you brought these judgments. Yes, Lord God the Almighty, true and just are your judgments. I can't think of two more uncomfortable things for us to say or declare together in worship. There are probably few phrases as popular among my generation as the phrase, "Don't judge me." Right? Doesn't judgment just have this overwhelmingly negative connotation in our lives and in our culture? And it seems to me that the church is consistently a source of this kind of judgment and attitude towards judgment. It seems that we have an aversion to anything that comes across or feels the slightest bit judgmental. That is, unless we are the ones doing the judging. Because believe it or not, we are judgmental creatures. And I don't mean we like Christians we. I mean we as in human beings. Neither you nor I can help it. I mean, do you know, have you thought about just how many judgments you have made today already before coming here? Just from waking up, you judged between your clothing options. First, is worship that place where I go to give God my best, and so should my clothes somehow reflect that? Or is worship the place where I'm invited by God to come just as I am, and so to dress casually represents that? Did you see that there is a judgment that's been made? Already we've done a number of things together here in worship. Worshiping God, singing, sharing, praying, standing together. And along the way we've made judgments between various actions and behaviors. We've asked the question, is it appropriate for me right now to raise my hands in worship, or is it inappropriate? What do I feel like? Do I feel like kneeling right now as an act of humble submission before God? Do I feel like, or do I just feel like standing? Made a judgment in our feelings. Or maybe we ask the question, am I required to do something, right? Am I required to sing? Or is it just kind of an expectation? Or just encouraged? Whatever it is, I've made a judgment here between how I might act. And actually at this moment, right now, you have made a judgment, or are preparing to make a judgment, or are actively making a judgment about whether or not you believe the words coming out of my mouth are true and trustworthy or false. We learn to judge at an early age. We learn this practice as we learn to look at 2 or 3 or 4 items, and we learn to distinguish or judge between them. We learn to recognize the difference. We judge between yellow and green. We learn to differentiate between a square and a circle. We judge that girls and boys are different. And Sesame Street along the way has even taught us catchy ways to not only remember to judge, but to do it. It's encouraged us to do this. When we sing the song, one of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. And in 2 weeks from now, a fraction of the American population will go to a polling place and will judge between 2 or more candidates for the presidency, perhaps for the Senate, for a variety of positions, and will judge between yes and no on a number of of local propositions or state propositions, and there is judgment to be made. I have set for myself for this morning a lofty goal, and I want to be honest with you about that up front. I want to communicate, this is what I intend to do together. This morning, I want to get us started on a journey. And I want for us to travel this together. And some of you have already begun this journey and are already somewhere down the road, but this is something we all, I think, need to do together and have a sense in moving this way. I want to reveal for some of you that for the first time this path, and for others, perhaps you might be a help in showing it. But I want for us to begin to walk the path of joy in judgment. Joy in judgment. Because when God judges the idols of our hearts and our hands, we have been set free for true worship. Joy in judgment. Can we even imagine those two words together? How? How can we even begin to experience this kind of joy in judgment? Because judgment for many Christians, or those who think that they are familiar with the Christian faith, judgment is immediately associated with punishment or hell. Judgment for many is the decision by God to send some to hell and others somewhere else. And then you move outside of the Christian faith in our world. And judgment has a different connotation, a different meaning, and it tends to be thought of in terms of earthly systems of judgment, justice, government. And many among us, fellow Americans, have struggled as they have experienced, or not experienced, I should say, the American promise of justice for all. And so they can't help but immediately associate the idea of judgment with earthly broken systems that don't promise life but are corrupt and unjust. And then there's kind of a third idea about judgment that is pretty common. And this is among Christians and non-Christians. People who are Christian and people who are outside of the Christian faith. We tend to think of judgment, and we tend to judge as a way of creating hierarchies. So I judge you better than I judge you. Or I judge you to be less value than someone else. And so our judgments are about ranking, some better, some worse. And so when we look at these three ways, these common Christian ways, these non-Christian ways, and these ways that are common to kind of everybody, it's no wonder that we tend to have this sort of negative taste in our mouths when we hear the word judgment. But like I said at the beginning, my real goal this morning is that you might begin to acquire a taste for God's judgment. My goal is that you just might begin to sing joyfully the words in our text this morning. Just are you who brought these judgments. Perhaps you could even find a place in the hymnal of your heart for a psalm like Psalm 98. A psalm that says, let the rivers clap their hands. Let the hills sing with joy together before the Lord. For he comes as judge of the earth. How often do our prayers for Jesus' return involve an expectation, an anticipation that return will involve him being the judge of the earth? How often do we pray that our just and true judge would come and enact his judgments among us? As the 7 angels come out of the heavenly sanctuary, as they are given 7 bowls full of the wrath of God, each bowl with one of the 7 plagues, these 7 angels prepare to be the answer to this ancient prayer in Psalm 98. And perhaps most shocking about what happens, what unfolds, is that the very rivers that are going to receive the 3rd bowl of judgment from these 7 angels, that they are going to become blood as a result of this action. These same rivers, according to Psalm 98, are the ones that are going to clap their hands before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. The recipient of God's judgment can celebrate. When was the last time you anticipated the Lord's judgment, hoped for it, welcomed it, celebrated this part of God's work in your life, in our lives, and in this world? God is judge, the scriptures declare. So what are some of the reasons that we can't go there, that we struggle to make that move? Why isn't our immediate response to an announcement of God's judgment, this joyful outburst of praise and thanksgiving and clapping and joy that we read in Psalm 98? I think at least one part, and we've already suggested this, is because in the church we've allowed a powerful, a beautiful, a complex word, judgment, to get taken over as the synonym for punishment and for hell. When God judges, God sends people to hell for eternal punishment. Or that's the way that the word ends up getting used, the story we tell. But as I've already pointed out this morning, we all judge. It seems that God has done something, given us something that's a part of his very nature and character in this ability to judge. And if we take a moment to consider our many, many judgments each and every day, perhaps that we can begin to explore just some of the ways that judgment as it's depicted in the scriptures is just so much more complex than mere condemnation. Because if we look at judgment at its most basic level, I mean, what is it? What is happening? And it's essentially this: to judge is to make a determination between 2 or more things, to distinguish. So follow me here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Heavens and earth are judged in that moment to be distinct entities. And God called the light day and the darkness night. Again, God has made in this case an observational distinction, an observational judgment between 2 things. And it goes further than this. Because God says, and the Bible tells us, and God saw that it was good. God judges the quality of his creation. And it turns out that we don't actually have anything to compare this quality to at this moment. Right away, it's this is good, this is good, this is good. We don't have anything to compare to. Everything is good. Until that first human is found to be alone. And God says, it is not good for man to be alone. And again, in this situation, God judges the conditions of his creation. But judging isn't left just to God here then. It gets expanded. Immediately, the human is invited into this work and into this judging work. God then begins to create more. He creates creature after creature, trying to find a helper suitable, judged appropriate for the human. How does one determine if a creature is suitable? But to judge. And so this opening account of Scripture is a picture of the creative God enlisting his human as a partner in judgment after judgment, declaring that none of these creatures is an appropriate counterpart to the human. And this is a really important example, or highlights an important principle in judgment, I should say. See, most of the judgment that we engage in and that God engages in is what you might call value-less judgment. Or more simply, if I judge that you are a man and I judge that you are a woman, this does not say that you are more valuable because you're a man than you because you're a woman. Or vice versa. You're the more valuable one because you're the woman than you because you're the man. This is a valueless judgment. You are a man, you are a woman. It merely states that I've determined, I've judged which gender you might be. And so let me explain this a little bit further. If you were to ever come into my office for premarital counseling or for marriage enrichment, the first thing that I would have you do, the two of you do, is fill out a questionnaire. And this questionnaire is designed to measure differences of opinion on all kinds of issues: money and sex and communication and children and faith. What the questionnaire does, the point of this questionnaire is to judge you. I'm not ashamed of that. What it's trying to do, it determines how you feel about certain topics, and it does so in relation to the person that you want to marry or that you want to stay married to. So what we would do together is we would then take a look at these areas where the questionnaire judged you different from one another, and we would begin to explore those differences and help create communication with regards to those differences. This is where soon-to-be married couples struggle. And I have a secret for all of you younger people who perhaps think that one day life will be better when you're married. Longtime married couples have the same struggles. What we tend to do is we want to attach value to our judgments. So when this assessment comes back and it says a man and a woman who are about to be married have different views on money, this young couple can't help but attach or add value to that judgment. The man, whose family has always taught him to save every single penny because you never know when you might be in trouble, instantly values his view of money above the views of his bride-to-be. He sees what is a difference, and he values it higher. And his bride-to-be, her family, has always given away what seems like irresponsible amounts of money. And so this assessment has rightly judged between them. The man and the woman are quite different in their view of the money. The man values his saving as more important, as a better way of dealing with money. The woman who comes from a generous family views their view as values their view of money as being that much more significant or important or better. But what if one of these views isn't better than the other? And so we go back then to the Garden of Eden, when that first human is sitting on his log, and God keeps sending new creatures to be judged, new creature after new creature, and he gets a cricket, and he says, nope, that's not a suitable helper, and he gets a giraffe, and he gets a platypus, and he gets an aardvark. And this human sees each of these and judges them, and he says, he's not a suitable helpmate, not a suitable helpmate. This is what he's not saying. He's not saying, not good enough, or I'm better, But he's not doing this. He's not devaluing these creatures by saying they are not a suitable helpmate and then giving them a name, distinguishing them, judging them as what they are. He's simply calling them what God has made them to be, something other than a human, and so incapable of being an appropriate partner for another human. I think if we can get this, our minds might be turned upside down when it comes to judgment. And we might just be able to sing and clap at the thought of God judging our lives. Maybe because I wonder, is it possible that when God, the just and the true judge, when this God makes judgments about things, these judgments aren't primarily value judgments? No, it's us, we, who are the ones who instantly attach value to our judgments, and so we assume that God must as well. So let me give you an example. Let me take the thing that we most commonly associate with God's judgment: sin. Sin. God is going to judge sin. What if? What if God's judgment on sin isn't a value judgment? What if when God points to sin and he says, that's sin, what if all God is saying is that this human being, created in the image of God, is still equally valued and loved by God, though he has missed the mark and fallen short of God's glory? What if God is not saying that the person whose life is marked with sin is not any less valuable than anyone else's? What if God's judgment isn't a value judgment? Perhaps this is an insurmountable hurdle for us, because probably part of the reason that the church is so quickly associated with negative ideas about judgment is because we can be pretty bad at separating judgment from valuation. The Pharisees had rightly judged the tax collectors and the friends of Jesus as sinners. In fact, it seems pretty clear that Jesus was well aware who he was keeping company with, and that these who he was eating with were, in fact, sinners, and that they had sinned. But where the Pharisees were indignant and they couldn't understand Jesus choosing to eat with them, Jesus ate with them as freely as he ate with the Pharisees, because they were equals, human beings, worthy of equal standing, equal value. And for Jesus, worth offering his life for. For Jesus to judge sin then is not to devalue or deem someone worth less than anyone else. It is, you might say, the work of a doctor. When you go to your doctor, you expect your doctor to judge your health and to give you an honest judgment. Consider what you would do if you went to your doctor and your doctor judged or determined that you had cancer in your body, but your doctor was afraid to tell you for fear that you might feel judged. You have cancer in your body. There's something going on. I don't really want them to know about that. You would be angry, right? You would be angry because cancer doesn't make you any less human. A person with cancer is no less valuable a human being than a person without cancer. So what you want from that doctor is you want that doctor to rightly judge your condition. This human has cancer. So that if you have cancer, the doctor can do something about it. A doctor might actually be able to remove that cancer. A major arc in the storyline of human history and our holy scriptures is that God's creation has been infected by a deadly disease. And the great physician is then at work identifying, judging the presence and the effect of that disease in order that he might then eradicate it from our lives and restore us and bring new life to his good and his beautiful handiwork. See, because God will judge the idols of your heart and your hands, setting you free for true worship. The disease of humanity is that lives that were intended to give glory to the Creator have been seduced and twisted such that they give glory to the creation instead. Where God creates, we take the credit for his creative work. Where God saves, we take the credit as saviors. Where God provides, we take the credit as providers. Where God satisfies, we take the credit. And if we don't take the credit, then we hand it off to some other part of the created order, praising what has been created rather than the one who created it. And this is highly delusional work that we're engaged in. But it's more than that. It is highly dangerous work. For life apart from God leads only to one end, and that is death. We were made for a life of joyful service to God. humbly submitted to his good and perfect will. Our lives, this constant living offering, invested in his life-giving work throughout creation and full to the brim of joyful song. This is what we were made for. Our lives aimed entirely toward the one who made us, who provides for us, and who satisfies us. But as Revelation makes abundantly clear, not only are we diseased, but we proudly wear our disease. In the book of Deuteronomy, the 5th book of the Bible, the people of God are instructed to bind God's instructions as visible symbols to their foreheads and to their right hands. These would be public statements, public declarations that these people were people submitted to the one true God and to his words as the authoritative word for their lives. But Revelation describes a people who wear and who bear a very different public symbol. Revelation calls this symbol the mark of the beast. Revelation describes this mark as being worn in visible places on the foreheads and on the right hands of the followers of the beast. One reason, these are the most public places to display one's loyalty, right? The forehead is like a giant billboard. When you meet somebody for the first time, you're looking at their eyes, you're seeing their forehead, and any mark that would be there would instantly draw your attention. And your right hand, and I probably shouldn't go into the details, but your right hand was considered your public hand. In many places in our world today, this is still the case, where sanitation is lacking, and you can't be certain that you are always going to be clean. Your left hand is reserved for private matters, and therefore you would never extend it to a person. And so your right hand is your public hand. And so just as the forehead would be the first thing to be seen, if you were to shake hands, if you were to extend an act of friendship or business, this would be the visible demonstration of your loyalty, of your allegiance. In other words, your allegiance to God or your love for your idols is very public. Your allegiance to God is something that you bear, that's visible, that's seen by those that you interact with. It's very visible. And if your life is marked by trust and allegiance and love for idols, the created things, instead of the Creator, well, it turns out that that's visible too. And there are many reasons why we turn to idols. Some of it's just the pure and simple seduction of it. It looks so good. It looks pleasing. For some, it's fear. For some, Revelation tells us it's spite. The judgment of God, then, is God acting on our behalf to distinguish himself from all other rivals. This is what we read about in Revelation 16. God pointing to our public and our private lives, our hearts and our hands, and saying, do you see who you are serving? Can you see who you are submitting to every day as Lord? Can you see who you trust with your wealth and with your life and with your loved ones? Do you hear who is receiving the praise from the lips from your lips, the lips of your mouth. Revelation is interested in doing two things. First, to point out our idols, to help us see clearly. If we will have ears to hear, I think we will discover that we have grown up with many idols and we have accepted many things that look like God, that sound like God, but are false idols, false promises, and perhaps have nothing to do with God himself. I mean, we certainly love God and we want to trust him. We come here Sunday after Sunday because we say that we want God to be involved in our lives. We want to be involved in what God is doing. And so we love him and we trust him, but it seems to me that the American way is to sort of cover our bases, to, take care of ourselves, build up our defenses just in case God lets somebody through, and really to live in fear. We speak of our allegiance to God in our hearts, but then our public lives give a very different testimony. After Revelation points out our idols, it then judges them. Revelation tells the story of a God who can take our measly idols, as powerful as we think they might be, and can strip them bare, revealing them to be what they really are, which is nothing in the presence of God, to be created things in the hands of a creator. And so to do this, Revelation 15 and 16 draws heavily from the story of God rescuing Israel from slavery in Egypt. We call this story the Exodus. And whatever you think this story might be about, it is certainly about this. It is about judgment. This story, in fact, shapes much of the way that future authors in the Old Testament will understand God's judgment and what it means for God to be judged and to enact his judgment. Those who hear judgment as the same word as punish tend to miss some of the most interesting details in this Exodus story, explaining more fully what it means for God to judge. In Exodus 12:12, we hear that on all of the gods of Egypt, I will execute my judgments. I am the Lord. And then later, as Moses describes the details and meaning of Israel's journey through the wilderness and out of Egypt, he said this about what happened in Egypt. On their gods also the Lord executed judgment. If you hear judgment and punishment as the same, you're going to struggle to hear the nuance of what's going on here. See, the plagues that set Israel free to worship God were not merely acts of punishment against the Egyptians. See, the plagues are judgments. They judge. Think about our working definition of judgment. They distinguish between two things. And so, when it is believed in ancient Egypt that the sun in the sky is a god, well then, if this god is served and submitted to and sacrificed, then this God will take care of you, and this God will rise for you, and this God will set for you and provide you just the right amount of heat and ultimately will care for you. If rightly honored and worshiped, you can manipulate this God and get it to do what you want. But what happens then? When someone comes along and says, that's interesting. You want to trust the sun for your life and for your crops? And then this man prays to the one he calls God, and your son disappears. Well, which one at this point is worthy of your service, of your submission, of your sacrifice, and of your songs? This God who is apparently controllable, or the God who says that he made the sun and who then takes control and demonstrates his power over it? When God takes action upon the sun, he is making the distinction between creator and created. False worship, true worship. Each of the plagues of Egypt seem to be targeted toward both Egyptians and Israelites, to point out to them how fruitless their worship of the Nile for life and provision was. Why worship a river when there is one who has made the river and can control it? God was demonstrating how he alone has control over the land, over the sea, over the air, and everything in them. Creatures and weather, and even the very blood of life. Egyptians and Israelites alike were offering their lives to various parts of the created order, and God intervened to say, worship me. Worship the Creator. God's acts of judgment become powerful demonstrations that separate or distinguish between that which is powerless and unworthy of worship, and that which is powerful and worthy of our entire lives. So we come to the final set of 7 judgments. Like a doctor, God names the cancer of creation for us. We are filled with stage 4 idolatry. It is rampant, spreading through our lives, spreading through our culture, spreading through our churches. The first bowl is then poured out upon those who publicly serve, submit, sacrifice, and sing to pretend gods. The second bowl is then poured out on the very source of false worship. The third bowl is poured out on those who have so thoroughly turned their backs on God that they have begun to slaughter God's people. The fourth bowl is then poured out on those who have gone beyond publicly worshiping false gods, and those who are now bold enough to curse the name of God himself. The fifth bowl is poured out on the very heart and throne of idolatry. The sixth bowl is poured out on the demonstrations of power that are so seductive and that lead people to turn from God. And the seventh bowl completes the work of judgment. It announces, it is finished. See for yourselves who is God and who is not. The idolatry is deep. It has made its way into creation's heart and lungs. It's taking residence in creation's mind and has begun to emerge in the skin. But the word that comes to us is, it's not too late. God can still heal his creation. God is still making all things new. In fact, this is what God has set out to do. God has identified the disease. He has rightly judged the sin, brokenness, the cancer of creation in all of its forms, pride and greed and lust idolatry. And God, with tools in hands, will cut out the cancer, setting creation free once and for all. The question for us becomes, will we let him cut the idolatrous cancer out of our lives? Or will we cling to the cancer, love our cancer, worship our cancer, refusing to trust Jesus? Jesus will do what he needs to do to demonstrate how empty our pretend gods really are. But if we harden our hearts, if we cling to our idols, refusing to allow God to judge them and remove them, well, then our path can only lead to death. Our end will be to curse God. And as jealous as Jesus might be for our affection, we will become equally as indignant against him, his grace, and his healing judgment. May we invite the judgment of God upon our lives, so that God might judge the idols of our hearts and of our hands, setting us free for true worship.